Warning: disturbing content, viewer discretion is advised. Serious, what is the creepiest unexplained thing that has happened to you? Posted one day ago by Shaznaz69. I was out walking my dog in some fields near my home when I was about 15. The last of the fields was an L shape and was a dead end that was completely fenced in apart from the entrance, so I decided that as there was no one else around I would let the dog off his leash while I walked the perimeter of the field and occasionally threw his ball for him. I threw his ball several times, and he'd always fetch it and bring it to me. I then threw it by the dead end part of the field. He ran towards it and then just stopped, starting barking and whining, and ran back to me. I walked towards the ball, picked it up, and at this point, I was in the corner of the L so could see into both the dead end and the main part of the field. There was still no one around, so I just threw the ball back to my dog, but he ignored it and was just staring past me and whining. The next thing I know, I was shoved hard from behind, and I fell to my knees. I immediately look around to see what had knocked me down, and there is literally nothing/no one there. I grabbed my dog, leashed him and ran as fast as I could. When I got home, I was shaking and had dirt on my hands and knees, so my sister asked me what had happened. I explained that I'd been pushed and didn't see who by, and she just assumed that I'd been my usual clumsy self and tripped, but then she saw a perfect large muddy handprint on the back of my t-shirt. I have no explanation for my dog's behavior, the shove that I felt, or the handprint on my t-shirt. It was a bright sunny day in August, and there was absolutely no one in the field with me, except for my dog. My 15-year-old sister went missing. After 5 weeks of searching, the police told my family to start considering the possibility she may be dead. My parents were distraught, and I was doing my best to look after them. None of us could accept she was gone for good. At this time, I was a waitress at a restaurant. Despite how horrific the current situation was, I still had to pay my rent. One night at work, a customer beckoned me over to her table. She told me she was a clairvoyant and that she could see how worried I was about my sister. She wanted to let me know that my sister was okay and that we would get her back the next week. I ended up talking to her for an hour after the restaurant closed. She talked for an hour about my sister, my family, and our lives. Everything she said, in such specific and finite detail, was frighteningly accurate. She told me that when my sister was returned to us, she would be wearing all white. But the one thing she said which was completely wrong was that my sister had black hair. My sister was blonde, like me. The following week we get a call from the police. My sister has been found, and they are transporting her back. The first thing I see as she walks through the gates at the airport is that she is wearing white trousers and a white t-shirt, and that her long blonde hair is now the blackest shade of black. A family friend posted on social media that her daughter had a school project due the next morning, and their printer had broken partway through. She asked if anyone could help. I happened to have a cheap printer in a closet, so I headed over and dropped it off with them. About a week later, she gave it back to me while we were at lunch, and I stuck it in my trunk and forgot about it. It rode around for a month before I took it out. So, it's on my entranceway table, the power cord is in a Ziploc bag beside it, and I'm putting away groceries when I hear a sound. I come out and watch it finish printing off a page which drops to the ground next to 2 other pieces of freshly printed papers. It hasn't had electricity in over a month, is connected to nothing, and moreover didn't have paper on it. I have zero clue how it printed. The pages were associated with the kids' project, like it saved in the system somehow. To this day, I'm baffled. Before we moved out of the apartment we lived in since I was a child, I was sitting in my empty bedroom and thinking about memories there. Everyone was outside putting stuff into the moving van, so I know I was totally alone in the house. In this bedroom, I had 2 windows. I kept a fan plugged into one during the summer, which it was around this time, and the knobs were facing out and not on top like normal box fans. Sometimes if it got too windy, the fan would start up and click on itself. I reckon this was because it was so old that once the blades were going, the whole thing was like fuck it, let's turn on. I think it being plugged in helped too, because it would already be hooked up to power. So, I'm sitting there, 15 years old and mixed emotions about leaving, when my fan starts going. I honestly don't even realize it at first, as I'm on my phone. But then I feel it get colder, and look up to see it on. It didn't freak me out at all, because I knew that it would turn on with the wind. I could also tell it was on, because it would make a slightly different sound once it was up and going. I'd how to explain the sound, just slightly more mechanic than the breeze sound. I shrug it off and go back to my phone. A few minutes pass, and I start getting cold. I get up to turn the fan off, but when I get over to it, I freeze. It wasn't even plugged in. It had a detachable plug, and I think my mom may have grabbed it when she was unplugging things. I kinda just stand there for a moment, confused, and that's when I look up outside. Normally when my fan would turn on with the wind, I could see the pine trees outside moving pretty hard. A light breeze would make it turn, but to make it turn on, it would have to be super windy, almost like a storm was coming. The trees were not moving. At all. There's no way that fan should have been moving, as if it had power, when there wasn't any wind to keep it going, and it wasn't hooked up to power. At that point, I kinda booked it out of my room, but I always wonder if it was the thing that had been tormenting me my whole childhood saying later. Got tons of more horrifying stories from that place, but that one always comes to mind. In middle school, I had a disturbing nightmare where I felt funny and was hanging out with really weird people. I spent time in a little shack with a wood-burning stove, a small corner market in the middle of nowhere, a basement where a couple was arguing. Anyway, I experienced it in real life when I was on meth in my 20s. I knew when the argument was, for example, predicted what the literal shack looked like, and I felt funny because of the fucking meth. It was incredibly disturbing. I've had dreams/nightmares like that, recurring ones that later on happen. Not deja vu but actual dreams that I tell someone, friend or family, like hey I had a dream about so-and-so. The earliest I remember was when I was 5, it was in black and white. I saw a kid playing with his toy cars at the schoolyard, and he had a gold tooth. Not sure why I knew it was gold since the dream was in B&W. The next day that same kid I've never seen before is playing with his toy cars and has a silver tooth. Those dreams, they all have a different feeling from regular dreams. Sometimes I brush them off since familiar places, and people appear in them. But later, months, even years, they happen. This happened when I was 6 years old. I was staying at a maternal grandparent's house with other relatives. I was in a bedroom on the second floor with my cousins, who were either younger or older than me. The room had a large window where you had a good view of the main street and the mountains. It was around 2 a.m. when we were all tired out and wanted to sleep. It was raining heavily, and my oldest cousin was about to close the blinds when he saw something which made him swear. We all cambered to where he was, and I saw what I saw, and it still freaks me. I would chalk it up to a hallucination from being tired, but all of us saw it. We saw a shape moving in the rain. It looked like a massive legless person crawling with its arms. It was invisible, but the rain and streetlights showed its form. It was dragging itself, and then it just disappeared. The rain it displaced, and the shadow it cast was gone. The next day we told all the adults. Now here's where it got weirder. My grandparents, my mom, and the other adults did not laugh at us, nor did they tell us it was just a trick. They all seemed worried, and my grandma took us to a nearby river and had us wash ourselves, and she brushed us with some green plants. We weren't allowed to sleep in the bedroom, so we slept in the living room. I remembered a kid of the adults stayed up all night. I asked my mom what the thing we saw was. Even my mom was not sure, but she said Grandma told her that it was probably a spirit belonged in the mountains and that someone pissed it off, so it wants retribution. Maybe it would have attacked whoever was outside at the time. Some of my cousins still remember that night while others were either too young to remember it or simply forgot about it. When I was in high school, I was going through a very rough time. We had moved from a house that seemed to have paranormal stuff going on, and our new house was perfect. This happened about 5 to 6 years after we moved. My bedroom in the new house was in the basement, and it always felt off, but I just contributed it to the fact that it was a basement, and my past experiences were just making me more anxious and jumpy. But one day, I was out with a friend after school, and only my mom and youngest sister were home. Everyone else was either at work, out with friends, or doing after-school stuff. When I got home, my mom and sister told me to go look at my bedroom. They looked scared and confused. I went down and saw my dresser had been knocked over, and my clothes were pulled out and thrown around the room. My sheets were pulled off the bed, posters were torn and barely hanging onto the walls. The lampshade was torn and sideways. Things that were on one side of the room were now on the opposite side. The place was destroyed. My mom said they were in the living room when they heard banging and crashes. She ran down to see what happened only to find it the way I did. I always wondered if somehow the chaos in my life manifested itself in some way to create that, like a poltergeist or something. I didn't want to know, though, so I slept on the couch after that. When I was a child, probably 6 or so, I was using the bathroom. There were two doors on opposite sides of the room. As I was doing my business, the door leading to the kitchen slowly swung open. Standing there was a man in jeans and a white t-shirt. That was scary enough because no one but my mother and I were home. But the man's face was just a swirl, like a gray cloud. I screamed and ran out the other door. My mom believed me, and we ran out of the house and called the police. They couldn't find the no-face man, but my mom and I both wondered if it was a ghost who was in the process of fully manifesting itself. The extra creepy part is about a month later, my uncle came to visit and was staying in the guest bedroom. We never mentioned what I saw to anyone. My uncle came out of the spare room one morning and said he saw an old man in jeans and a white t-shirt sitting in the rocking chair, just rocking and looking out the bedroom window. My mom passed when I was 13, and for the 4 months after I had been living with my stepdad, an absolute hell, drugs, other women in and out, etc. I'm still mad at him, but I can forgive. It was his way of coping maybe. Anyways, it was time for me to leave for good. I was in and out of his house, grabbing things that were mine and taking them to my grandma's. My stepdad was passed out on the couch one of the last days I went for my items. He told me something like, "She's watching you. She knows you're here." I thought it was drunk talk, so I ignored him, and I went into my mom's old room, and as soon as I walked in, an old musical Angel antique started playing. I could have passed it off completely as the wind being moved or broken until I flipped it over, and the switch was on off. After that, I walked back, and my stepdad said, "I told you." I regret not grabbing and taking it, but I took everything else that was hers, and to this day, I still think about that and wonder why that happened. There are other unexplainable things that still happen, but this one was just one I had a hard time not seeing as creepy. Bit of a long one, I know dog stories aren't always well liked, but this one's. Yeah. My cousin, A, owned a pub when I was around 12/13-ish, and I used to stay there for weeks on end as we were always very close like sisters. There was one day where my other younger cousin, Jay, and I were up in the flat alone while A was working downstairs, just watching films and stuff. We got bored, so we took the two little Shih Tzus onto the landing to play. Almost as soon as we started playing, the male dog, Gizmo, froze dead in his tracks and stared into thin air. Quite unusual for him as he was the most ADHD dog I'd ever met, constantly fidgeting and moving around. I shouted for him to come and he didn't, also unusual. The female dog, Tilly, then did exactly the same thing. It was so weird they were just frozen in place like little statues. Then they started yapping like crazy and zooming around the hallway, biting at the air in different places. This went on for what felt like ages, then they just stopped. Tilly wandered off uninterested eventually, but Gizmo stood just staring at the ceiling. He kept going onto his hind legs like they do when they're trying to reach something. I laughed, and we sat on the floor with him thinking he'd stop when we did so, but he didn't. We looked up to the ceiling, which was very high up as the flat above the pub from like Victorian times I think. We looked for ages and laughed about how we couldn't see anything and how daft Gizmo was being. Then I saw something, no word of a lie, dirty boot prints on the ceiling. Right in the middle, like someone had walked in a line. I didn't say anything to Jay because I thought I saw things, I just stared absolutely terrified. Then she started screaming bloody murder. She said she could see them. She screamed for ages, and I had to shake her to shut her up. We ran downstairs to tell A, and she came up with her then boyfriend to tell us we were silly. They saw them too,